All right, we are live. Let's see who's in the room. Let's see. So if you're in the room, if you're in the chat box, drop your name and where you are from. Let us get to know you a little bit. Let's get some names rolling through here. All right, so today, guys, we got a very special guest on our webinar, the one and only Bobby Cappuccio. Bobby, welcome to the webinar. I'm excited to have you, and I'm sure we're in for an amazing hour of amazing content. Just for the people that may not know who you are or may not be familiar with your work, give us a quick little snapshot of who you are and what you do in the industry.
Who am I? Such an existential way of starting a webinar. Who are we anyway? I am nothing. Anyway, my background is I started out in health and fitness as a trainer, was quickly and forcefully moved into management, then forcefully moved into sales. That's a whole different story in and of itself. Went from there into National Academy of Sports Medicine, became the director of professional development, developed a lot of the professional development curriculums, sales, leadership, cultural transformation, coaching, co-founder of a company called PTA Global. I was the content curator, for lack of a better word, for a company called FitPro. Basically been consulting and presenting in the industry upwards of 20 years now, just to give you a hint at how devastatingly old I am. I don't know if that's pathetic or not, but yeah.
So in your journey's taken you in many different directions, from PT to the director to educator. And I know we talked about kind of our main point of this webinar was really looking at the 3 myths around behavioral coaching. And so I wanted to dive into that and start sharing some of that. So I'm going to kind of give you the floor and let you run away with the content for the day.
Oh, you're going to regret that, but thank you. I think there's a lot of conversation, not only in our industry, but in every industry where your performance is dependent on the performance of others. You can only have what you want by helping enough other people get what they want. And I can't really think of any industry where that is not the rule. I'm sure there are some exceptions, but at the moment, I do kind of draw a blank. And the misconceptions about change and failure they're permanent, because neither are. I mean, famously, Thomas J. Watson Sr., founder of IBM, little company we know about, when he was asked by a reporter, what's the secret of success? He said, double your rate of failure. Thomas Edison reported similarly to Napoleon Hill when he was writing Think and Grow Rich, where he talked about 10,000 failures. And when a young Napoleon Hill ignorantly said, well, how could you persist in the midst of so many blatant failures? He said, I never once failed. I learned how not to invent the light bulb 9,999 times. The only possible solution that would be left was the right one. And we start to hear these stories and we start to come up with some conceptions. And a lot of times our conceptions comes from the mistake that, the world is our narratives. Now, we are our narratives, but the world's not our narratives. We don't see the world as it is. We tend to see the world as we are. And because a lot of people get into coaching because they are very passionate and very empathetic people, whatever has worked for them in the past, that becomes the definitive methodology. And a couple of myths that come out of this, and the most pervasive is, I change people's lives. I mean, if you talk to any coach or any trainer, anyone within the wellness arena about, well, quintessentially, tell us what it is that you do. The most common answer, in many different shapes and forms, but the most common answer is centered around, I change people's lives, and that's beautiful. And that is altruistic. Unfortunately, it's not correct. You don't change anybody's life. I think the only person who can ever, by sheer force of will, change another person's life is Professor Charles Xavier. And even for him, that's kind of difficult because he doesn't exist in the real world. He's just a Marvel character. And I think we can provide people with the resources to be at their most resourceful in coming up with solutions for their own lives to attain that which they truly want. We can give people encouragement. We can give people inspiration, very different than motivation, but we don't create change. And when we assume that we create change for somebody, that actually hurts the client in a couple of ways. One, if you look at the research on what creates enduring changes in behavior, DC and Ryan in their self-determination theory talk extensively about intrinsic motivation. Now, what creates intrinsic motivation? There's three elements, and those three elements can be discussed within the arc of motivation, ARC being an acronym, ARC. And the very first component of intrinsic motivation within that acronym is autonomy. When you infringe upon someone's autonomy, you get what psychologists would call reactance, irrational pushback. I mean, I don't know, maybe you've had this scenario. I know a lot of people listening to this have had it, where somebody goes out, they seek out your advice. And then when you give them the advice that they sought out, you didn't volunteer, they reject it and argue with it. Well, should I break up with him? Well, yes, I think he's a bad match for you. Well, why do you say that? You're always so hard on him. Well, I don't know. For one thing, he's already married. So that's an obstacle right there. Last week he sold all your jewelry, used it to buy crystal meth. I reckon you could do better. Oh, you don't know what you're talking about, but we have a lot of fun together. Well, why'd you ask? Because whenever somebody imposes upon our autonomy, they impose on one of the things that we value most, which is freedom of choice. I mean, now we have such abundant choices, we lose the conceptual framework of why choice is so powerful and why lack of choice is so painful in the first place, where 10,000 years ago, if you were a tribe and every time you walk down a certain path, you would hear rustling in the bushes, a roar, and then you turn around and go, hey, well, where's George? George was a very popular name for tribesmen. I've done the research. And you've lost George. Well, there was only 11 of you. You've lost a lot of your resources. The freedom to choose other paths depend on the survival of the tribe. And it was in direct correspondence to your ability to gather resources. So people reject it. What you also do is rob people of self-accountability. If there's no self-accountability and the result is up to your advice or your direction, if it doesn't work, well, now what, coach? And if it does work, that person's not accountable either way. And where there's no self-accountability, there is no long-term behavior change. Not only are you taking away self-accountability, you're taking away the win. Because when somebody feels that they have arrived at their own conclusion and that they have implemented successfully the steps that they've come up with, what that does now is it internalizes a sense of self-efficacy. I'm going to back up for a second. How I define self-efficacy is someone's inward belief in their ability to initiate and then perpetuate a series of behavioral responses in correspondence with what they want. So if we use that definition of self-efficacy, when someone lacks self-efficacy, change in and of itself is very difficult, if possible at all, and it doesn't endure. But if we have a high level of self-efficacy, we have a high level of probability of achieving any goal we set for ourselves when you are the agent of change. So if you take a look at, what's your favorite film?
Remember the Titans.
Okay, beautiful example, right? And everybody listening to this right now is thinking about, their favorite film, whether it's, I don't know, for some people, it's like Gone with the Wind. For some people, it's, an indie film, Lord of the Rings. My girlfriend, did her thesis on Lord of the Rings. That's her favorite. Every single one of those films follow what the late, great Joseph Campbell would call the hero's journey. So you think about it in your relationship with a client. When you approach the client with, I change people's lives, no matter how well-meaning, no matter how altruistic that statement is, and I believe it comes from that place, you step into the role of hero of their life story. You write yourself into their life story as the protagonist. Now, that causes a lot of problems because if you think about Remember the Titans, or you think about your favorite film, it's never the hero that's the most important. As a matter of fact, how do you know the hero? Because the hero is usually the most reluctant. The hero's not like, okay, pick me. I'm going to step up front. I know most people listening to this are not old enough to get the reference, but for my own entertainment, there was a show on TV back in the 70s and 80s called Welcome Back, Kotter. And I used to watch it as a very little kid because it supposedly took place in Brooklyn. And there's this guy, Horshack, and whenever the teacher would ask a question, Horshack would go, me. Well, that's never the hero. That's the annoying kid in the class we all had to deal with growing up. The hero is always second guessing. The hero is always reluctant. What initiates the first step in the hero's journey is the magnitude of the quest. The quest itself is so big, it overcomes the normal ambivalence that's part of considering the pursuit of anything that's worth pursuing in the first place. But as soon as the hero steps out into the journey, what happens? They run into problems. There's trouble along the way, and then they gather allies that help them persist just a little bit further. But at some point, those allies are not good enough because they face the abyss. This is a challenge so big that it results in death, not literal death, or sometimes it does in film, but a death of the person you were, the belief systems you used to have. So at this point, you either need to turn back or you need to face the chasm, face the abyss, and cross it. And if you cross it successfully, you get to return home, but you're never the same person. You have a different mindset. You have a different perspective. You yourself are brand new. And what you've learned and what you acquired in most stories and mythology serves the entire tribe. It serves your community. And the person who comes along at the right time at very critical points in the plot is the guide. So as my friend Dr. Roy Sugarman is fond of saying, we're not the sage on the stage, we're the guide by the side. And the guide doesn't change a life. That's in the realm of the hero. The guide provides the resources for the hero to be at his or her most resourceful in becoming the leader that they are looking for, which is important because what leaders have are three characteristics. They can imagine a future that would not occur otherwise. So, isn't that what, you have somebody who's 46 years old, they have signs of metabolic syndrome. They're sleeping 3 hours a night. They're drinking 6 cups of coffee a day. Is there not a future that is inevitably on the way? You could see a future before it even emerges. That's not some spooky, fortune telling type of shit. That's an honest assessment of what's happening. Now, if you don't intercede, that future does not serve them, and that's not what they want. But by you helping that person intercede on their own behalf, you bring about a future that would not have occurred otherwise. So number one, you need a vision. 2, you need a strategy. And then you better be able to communicate in a way that is not only rational, but it is emotionally compelling. It's inspiring, causing a group of people or a single client to behave differently in a way that brings that future vision into their current reality. Because we always talk about the second myth is knowledge is power. Knowledge is not power. How many times have you seen people that know what to do, but they just cannot get themselves to do it? Gemma Calvert at Warwick University in England did a study on 32 moderate to heavy smokers. Now, if knowledge was power, we would believe, wow, you know what? We need to get the word out that smoking will kill you. If only people knew this, we could eradicate the problem within 30 days. We know that's not the case. So she took these group of 32 smokers. This is interesting research. And basically, she had them fill out a questionnaire. They would look at pictures of really blatant smoking ads. So here in the United States, the smoking ads are like, smoking can cause lung cancer, emphysema, and none of that's nice, but it's more the logical consequences of smoking, where if you go through the European Union, it'll just say in big block letters, smoking kills. But if you go to Canada or if you go to Australia, my God, they go beyond that. There's these pictures of people with oral cancer and their face is completely rotting off and it's horrifying. Or you see a picture of a skeleton smoking. So if knowledge was power, those ads would be very effective. Nobody looks at a picture on a cigarette pack of a skeleton smoking and go, whoa, what are they saying? If I keep smoking, I'll look thinner. This is fantastic. I can't wait to light up. They're very effective. So basically what these 32 participants were asked is self-report on how effective these ads are. Do you know every single person in that study reported that those ads were extremely effective because when they looked at those ads, they got angry or they were terrified and they thought about not smoking. But then when they put them in a magnetic resonance imaging machine or a functional MRI, they were shown the same exact images. Now, if fear and anger was the predominant emotion, you would see a lot of activity in the amygdala. But the amygdala was relatively silent. Here's what was interesting. The part of the brain that was most active was a part of the reward pathway, the nucleus accumbens. Now, the front part of the nucleus accumbens is called the ventral striatum. The ventral striatum deals with anticipation of reward. And why that was so curious is because when they were shown the same ads that they said were a very effective deterrent, their brain wanted a cigarette. They didn't think about not smoking. Like, wow, I need to light up. So behavior change is a lot more than just knowledge. Well, if you only knew, if you only had the information, if you don't, not that simple. And here's another one. And this is probably the most pervasive. Lack of results is a lack of discipline. You're just lazy. You're a snowflake. You want things to be handed to you, and you don't get what you want because you don't hustle for it. That's interesting because, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Uber and I was speaking to the young lady driving the car, and she was talking about she gets off of work at 5. She's just a single mom, and she goes home, spends a little bit of time, feeds her kid, and then she's driving until like 1 o'clock in the morning and wakes up 5, and she's barely getting by. And man, if only she can increase her income. So she's not getting what she wants because she's lazy. She's sleeping 4 hours a night, working basically 16 hours a day. What does she need to do? Go up to 20 hours a day, 21 hours a day? It's not lack of hustle, it's lack of strategy. And I think when you see someone who knows what to do, but doesn't do it, that's even worse. That's a different scenario altogether. Take a look at not what do people not do. Look at the other end of that. What is it that people do and they can't help themselves from doing it? You don't have to motivate someone to go on a date with someone they're attracted to. We've all gotten off of work after like 12 hours and we were completely knackered. And we're like, there is no way I'm doing anything. I'm going home and watching Netflix, having a beer. And you're on your way to your car. You can barely make the walk, right? You're delirious. You get a text on your phone from someone who you've been keen on for a while. And they say, you know what? I just happen to be around your area. Would you want to pop around and get a drink? All of a sudden, you muster up unprecedented levels of motivation. You're witty, you're charming, you're fully energized. You talk about how tired you are, but you take in all the financial, all of the time that it takes to go plan a holiday. And then when you come back from holiday, you're so exhausted that you need another holiday, but you go on multiple vacations. So basically, people do what's aligned with their value systems. So if there's a struggle between what somebody says they want and what somebody actually does, well, I want to lose weight, but oh my God, chocolate cake just always takes advantage of me. It's not because they lack character or discipline or willpower or passion. They lack alignment. They have not connected what it is they say they want to do with what their highest values are. And that conflict creates contention. So, I mean, we could go on and on for hours about what some strategies are, but what I'd love to do is give people one specific strategy and the research to support this conclusion that you can use tomorrow and be effective with your clients or in your own life.
Please. So give us one. Like, what are some strategies? Like, what is one strategy that as a coach I can do to help that challenge with my clients?
Okay. Well, just one of many. I talked about this with IOM a few weeks ago, and it turned into an hour conversation. So I'll give you a more succinct strategy. And, I've adapted this from the Dutch eating questionnaire. A lot of times we go out and we say, well, I want to do one thing, and then we do another. And that internalizes, reinforces a belief system that is the root cause of the problem. For example, we've all said, okay, I'm starting a New Year's resolution. Not many of us, because exercise isn't something we do. It quintessentially is who we are. So New Year's Eve is irrelevant. But Scranton University in 2015 did a study and found out, surprise, surprise, out of everyone who sets a health and fitness goal for their New Year's resolution, only 8% managed to keep it. Wow, 92% at a time when people are most motivated to change, absolutely fall on their face in this area. And here's one of the reasons why I think it happens. Because they jump in. They say, well, you know what? It's taken me months, years, sometimes decades to develop the habits that I currently have and be the person I am. Tomorrow, I'm going to change it all. And then one thing at one point in the week goes absolutely wrong. And they go, oh, I knew it. They adapt what Dr. Martin Seligman calls a negative explanatory style, which is personal, permanent, and pervasive. I'm a pig. I'm undisciplined. I always screw this up. And what that does, I mean, we go home and we say, well, I'm just going to go ahead and, eat a chicken salad. And what we really do is go for the Haagen-Dazs. And we wake up the next morning and go, that's it. You know what? I'm going to start Monday. So what do you do over the weekend? You eat everything in the house that's not moving. Like your dog is running laps because he's smart. He's not taking any chances. And you just do this on Monday, you feel a bit crap about yourself. And you say, oh, you know what? I'm starting at the first of the month. And the first of the month turns into a holiday. Next thing you know, we're back at January 1st. Rather, reframing what this failure means. First of all, failure is a single isolated event. It's not a person. It's not an identity. One of the things I had always done with my clients is said, okay, now as you start on your journey, what's going to go wrong? Well, nothing's going to go wrong. Okay. Well, have you ever tried something similar to this before? Yes. Okay. And if nothing went wrong, how do we get back to where we are now? So, being that the past does not dictate your future possibilities, but things that occurred in the past could show up again, how are we going to deal with it? So, you go completely off the rails. What does it mean? And a lot of times, they're not kind. They'll say things like, well, it means I really, screwed up. They don't say screwed up, but I'm just editing it because this is a family time webinar. And say, okay, well, and what happens inside of you? When you think that thought, what are the emotions that it conjures up? And when you're in that emotional state, what happens around you? In other words, how do you start to behave? What do you engage in? And does that support you? Well, if it doesn't support you, why do you do it? What else could it mean? So think of another meaning. And a lot of times people get stuck and say, okay, well, think about someone you truly love and care about. Let's say, a sister, mom, your kid, and they're trying to do something similar that you're trying to do. And one day they just don't do it. And it all goes wrong. What's the meaning? And a lot of times they have a lot more constructive and kind explanations for other people's behaviors than their own. Say, wow, interesting. I asked you to create a meaning for someone you care about, and it was different than your own. Think about that for a second. So what else could this mean if it didn't mean that you were a total failure? And then take a look at what's good about this. How do I learn from this? Because when you take a look at the Dutch eating questionnaire, it breaks it down into a few elements. And the very first element is what happened? So what did you want to have happen versus what actually happened? Because if you can't discern a gap between what you want to have happen and what actually happened, you don't have a problem. You're just moaning, basically. So once you identify that gap, what emotional state were you in? So in other words, when you reach for sweets or you reach for something that disempowers you, that's not part of what you want, what emotional state are you normally in? So do you most often reach for food when you're feeling worried? When you're feeling anger, when you're feeling outright afraid, like what's the emotion? Maybe when you're happy, you're out with your friends, you're not thinking, you grab just an extra drink, then another one, another one, another one. So what's the emotional state you're in when you don't do what you say you want to do? And then what's the intensity? So if you're at the office and anxiety is usually what makes you reach for food, maybe in an attempt to mitigate that anxiety by elevating your tryptophan levels in your brain, right, which help with serotonin release, which decrease that level of anxiety you're feeling. Because isn't it funny how people never come back on the weekends and then get on a coaching call and go, oh my God, I blew it. I blew it. The leafy greens and Brussels sprouts, I just couldn't control myself. I just went off. No, it's always sugary, fatty foods. Why? Because of the biochemical effect it has in the brain. So a lot of what we talk about is like overeating. Maybe that's self-medicating. So what's the emotion you feel when you're most likely to break your commitments to yourself? And then what intensity? So is it like a level 2 intensity of anxiety? Or maybe it needs to get to a level 8. So when you feel yourself at a level 2, you can start to implement alternative strategies that never let you get that far. So now think about it. You have, first of all, what is the emotion that is the trigger for that unwanted behavior? What's the intensity? And the next thing is, what is the environment? So are you most susceptible when you succumb to peer pressure? Like, you tell somebody, oh, I'm dieting now. And people always try to like screw you up because it's fun for them. Oh, okay. Well, you know what, Bobby, you didn't bring these cookies to the office, so these don't count. Here, we'll have you watch them, knowing that you're not going to touch any. Like people are just evil sometimes like that, aren't they? And so, or is it when you're by yourself, when you're home alone? So now you know the emotional state. Now you understand the intensity and the environment. Step number 4 is, what is the constructive explanation for why you do what you do? And what's the substitution pattern? How do you substitute the behavior? So, if you're talking about, well, how do you want to feel? That is the first part of a substitution pattern. When you reach for food, how are you feeling? What's the intensity? What's the environment? Versus how would you rather feel? And what other activities can induce that state without having to reach for food? So if I'm trying to decrease my level of anger or sadness or fear, all of those have different scales. There are other ways to do that. So if I go out for an intense walk, even, that results in a dopamine and serotonin release. Listening to music actually releases dopamine. And you know what? Working off a to-do list and completing a task that's not stressful, very simple, actually creates a dopamine spike. I mean, those people who are fanatical about their lists. Every time you have a conversation, wait, I'm going to make a list. Yeah, you do that. Go ahead, make a list. Good idea. And they're always carrying their lists around, they're crossing things off their list. Why? Because it's addictive. Because every time I cross something off my list, I get rewarded for it. The ventral tegmental area of my brain secretes dopamine. And then because I got that dopamine boost and it's motivating and it actually feels good, my ventral striatum we talked about earlier starts to anticipate further reward by completing other small successive tasks throughout the day. And then the other part of the reward pathway, the medial portion of the orbital frontal cortex, gets conditioned to seek and respond to task-specific rewards. So, doing things that are small, that don't require a ton of stress, but they're significant, getting that done could make you feel better and make you not want to reach for food. So you have exercise, you can engage in music, you can complete a work-related task that's important to you. Sex has a dopamine and serotonin release. Okay, you can't do that all day at any point throughout the office. They tend to lay people off for that. Or watch a 3-minute clip of comedy. Just get you out of that state. So there are things that you can do. And when you do that, just like you go over in your head, or your client goes over in your head, when you do something you think you're not supposed to, you go, oh, I suck, I should have never done that. Acknowledge when you were about to do something you didn't want to do, and you used a strategy, a substitution strategy, successfully. What does that mean? What strength does that reveal about you? And how can you use that strength in the future? Because if you're going to acknowledge the times you screw up, you got to acknowledge the times when you really succeed. I mean, if we're all just a walking bag of biases, and we are, and our stories dictate our behaviors, tell yourself a better story.
So would you say part of the coaching process is me being the trainer or the coach is helping them acknowledge that when they make a mistake or they think they messed up or they screwed up on something, is defining what the state was leading up to that and then figuring out how to prevent that from happening before it gets to the point of grabbing that cookie or that chocolate cake, reverse engineering it back to what triggered that state.
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay.
A lot of times we place emphasis on thoughts, and thoughts are a good thing, but we grow up, and in self-help books it says things like, well, thoughts are things. You become what you think about most of the time. Well, if that was the case when I was 15 years old, I would have been a 16-year-old girl. So you don't become what you think about most of the time. I think you become the behaviors you engage in most of the time. And what influences behaviors so much more so. I had a really interesting conversation. Somebody you might want to do a webinar with in the future. Interesting guy. His name is Dr. Joseph Ledoux. And he is a professor at NYU. And he's probably one of the most commonly cited, quoted neuroscientists alive today. And his specialization is fear and how emotions produce behaviors, kind of relevant to our industry.
Yeah.
And he talked about how emotions are oftentimes the most provocative precursors of behaviors. How you feel determines what you do. So being present and mindful of the emotional state you're in when that emotion starts building, and having preemptive strategies and understanding how to get yourself into emotional states that act as the catalyst for the behaviors you want is a critical element of behavioral change.
Wow. Wow. How do you pronounce his last name? Or how do you spell his last name?
It is Ledoux.
Okay.
Ledoux or Ledoux.
The docs. So I wanted to go back. So you mentioned when we first started the hero's journey. And so you mentioned at that point where the fitness coach kind of positions himself as the hero in that, or tries to put himself or herself in that position of the hero in that client's journey. Now, is that a mistake, or are we setting it up for failure if we are the hero and not allowing the client to be the hero in their own journey?
Well, if we're the hero, and it's basically, Colette, do what I say, and you do it, and it works. Well done, Bobby. That was my strategy. You never internalize that result as being something you produced. So you don't develop self-efficacy because of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the internal duress that ensues when we try to hold two opposing perspectives in mind and still retain the ability to function. I mean, it's obvious of how hard that is if you've ever been fortunate enough to sit at a table, maybe a family gathering, those family gatherings when everyone gets together only when they have to, because some people just really don't get on very well. And you have a liberal and a conservative at the same table. If you've ever listened to those conversations, cognitive dissonance becomes quite evident. But by engaging in one small win, you start to produce evidence and lay the groundwork for greater, larger, successive wins. You start to give yourself a reputation to live up to. And if what you're doing is linked with who you want to be, so when what you try to do is linked up with who you want to be, and elevation and self-efficacy has an effect on self-esteem. We not only feel more confident about our ability to perform in that one area, we feel better about ourselves as a person, and we try to become more consistent in the constructive behaviors that we've been engaging in. It's kind of like when you start on, anybody who was ever dieting for a sporting event or a competition, the first week is horrible. Like all you do is dream of, bagels. But after you engage in that behavior, not only, there's biochemical reasons why this happens, but after you start to engage in a certain behavior pattern over and over, it starts to feel good. You get intense satisfaction from the level of discipline you're demonstrating. It becomes harder to turn back than to just keep going forward. It becomes easier and easier to turn things down and say, oh, no, you know what? That doesn't serve me. I'm not going to have that drink. I'm not going to eat that food. I'm not going to engage in that.
So what are some strategies that, as a coach, because this is relevant with a lot of new coaches, when they first start training, they come into the industry thinking, I'm going to change the world, and I'm going to help everybody, and I'm here to change lives, which is true. But then how do you, as a coach, become that guide by the side and help the client become the hero in their own journey, or help her become the hero in her own journey?
Well, two things I'll say is, there's nothing wrong.
Froze on me. Bobby just clicked out. We had some technical difficulties. He's going to click back on. My mic was off. So until he gets back on, what have been some of your takeaways so far for those who have been on the webinar? No takeaways? He's hopping back on. He just sent me a message. Give us like 2 minutes. You there, Bobby?
Yes, I am here. I just want to thank everybody for joining us for that short intermission. Little commercial break. So yeah, I think, how do you get somebody to transition was the question from being the hero to understanding role as guide by the side when they enter the coaching world, and how do they mitigate all of that outwardly directed passion where, like the great Jim Rohn used to say, I used to think, I'll change him if it kills me. Well, I nearly died. How do you overcome that? Is that what you were asking, right?
Yeah. So how do we make it to where, the hero's not the coach, the hero's empowering the client, or I'm sorry, the coach is empowering the client to be the hero in their own journey. So more of the accountability that isn't all owned by me, the coach, but is owned also by the client.
Okay. I'm going to say something a little bit different than I thought I was going to say before that forced break. And it's controversial. I've gotten into with groups of people spirited debates over it, but it's true nonetheless. And it'll make your life a lot easier, and it will make you more effective. And it will help you help others produce results to a greater degree, far more expeditiously when this resonates with you. And that is, understand rule number one. You are not responsible for results. You are responsible for effort. You are responsible for doing all of your study. You are responsible for growing the skills. You are responsible for showing up, holding the space where you are empathetic, where you are compassionate, where you have the presupposition that my belief is greater than your doubt. As your coach, I know you have ambivalence. I know you have doubts, but my belief is greater than your doubt. And I believe you are resourceful enough to have what you truly want. If you hold that space, you're putting in all the effort you need to put in to show up as the right leader for that person at that time. However, you're not responsible for results. They have to be responsible for results, because if they're not, the results will not come. And if they come, they will not stay. And that is what people are hiring you for. Results. Results is the name of the game, period. I was on a plane months ago, Southwest. Now, I know you spend a lot of times on planes, and there's this unwritten rule on an international flight. We're here for 15 hours. Look, you don't talk to me, I won't talk to you. All bets are off on Southwest. It's only an hour. Everybody's chatting to absolutely everybody. And there's this guy next to me, and I reluctantly got into the conversation because I had some work to do before I landed. But it became an interesting conversation. I really liked the guy. And he was telling me about his work and his family, and he's married. And he said he was married. And I remember, like, towards the end of the flight, as we're descending, I look over on his hand and I see he's got his wedding band, but it's on his index finger. And I said to him, mate, are you aware that you've got your wedding band on the wrong finger? He's like, yeah, it's because I married the wrong woman. And that's kind of the approach we take, is that we can change people. No, effort, not results. Whenever you enter into a relationship where I'm going to change something about you, you're saying you're broken. And people are not broken. They do not need fixing. They are whole and complete. And if we don't have that perspective, we're not going to be a coach that someone wants to open up to, and where there's no open communication, there's no emotional connection to values. And when what we are teaching or what we offer is not connected to values, there's no relevance. Where there's no relevance, there's no value. And there's no value, there's no result. So effort, not outcome. Number two is your job to produce results is education. And a lot of times we think education is what we put into somebody. It's what we tell them, right? Here, don't do that, do this. Well, how come you didn't do that? It's an age-old question. Education, the root of the word is educo or educere, which literally means to lead out or draw out of someone. So our job is to extract solutions and strategies from someone. And if you want to succeed big, think small. We're taught think big, dream big dreams, and that's great. But once you have that big dream, it's a very small series of compounding. It's almost like an exponential result, compounding actions that produce that result. And start with something that is so inconsequential, they simply cannot fail. So if you spoke to your client and you said, why don't we come up with 10 things? And do I have your permission for every strategy you offer? Let's say weight loss. That's a common one. Do I have your permission to offer one? And we'll stop when we get to 10. They love that. It's a fun game because it takes pressure off of them. So they offer something and you don't judge it. Just whatever they say. I'm going to lose 10 pounds by getting a chainsaw. Okay, that's extreme. But okay, let's stick with it for now. And I throw something out and then we get to 10. I say, okay, now when you look at these 10 things, which one of these do you think not is the best idea, but the one that you are most able to execute? You're most willing and able. Because it's not the merit of the idea, it's the execution of the idea, right? So let them pick something. And then say, okay, on a scale from 1 to 10, how confident are you that you'll be able to execute on this thing that you've chosen? And if it's anything under an 8, say, okay, how do we reduce the size of the goal? How do we make it even smaller? Okay, on a scale from 1 to 10, anything else? Smaller, smaller, smaller. Because if they do anything, even the most seemingly inconsequential thing, they start to build evidence. And then at the end of the week, you can look back and say, Jane, what happened? Here you had someone who you said failed at exercise and changing her habits in the past, but you set and successfully kept a goal 7 days in a row. What do you think that means? Who is that person? What were the conditions that produced that level of success? What was the mindset? What are the strengths? So now you can build on that and build on that. And now she becomes more engaged. It becomes fun to participate in the game because she sees there's reward at the end of the tunnel. And, very often, sometimes people will not stick to their goal all 7 days. And let's say they stuck to it 6 out of the 7 days. What do they focus on? The one day they messed up. So they go, oh, let me tell you about the day that, it all went wrong. Well, Jane, how's about this? I want to hear that. Just hold that for a second. Would you mind telling me about the 6 days it went well? Usually that's kind of like a form of reflection back to them where they can look at that and go, okay, yeah, that's not as catastrophic. So that's one way. Okay. Is how do I extract a solution rather than install it? They're not an operating system. You didn't buy like a new laptop. This is a very messy, dysfunctional, beautiful, whole and complete human being. They're very complex.
So as you go through and I think we're on the final myth. I think we're on the third myth.
Oh, are we? I lost track of what myth was.
So we kind of went in different tangents and went a different rabbit hole. So we covered the whole, we covered the hero's journey, we covered the knowledge. What is that third myth?
Oh, discipline.
Okay.
Oh God, that's the hardest to answer because I probably have the most to say about it. Not all, but I suspect some of the people that are beating their chest, talking about you need to hustle, you got to work harder, you're not doing it right. You really need to ask yourself, who is this person? What have they done? What type of life are they living? Do I want that person's life? Because if you accept somebody's worldview, you accept their destiny. And like, let's say it's Gary Vee, who's built like an empire in media. You know what? Whether I agree or disagree with what he's saying, I'm going to shut up and listen. But if it's, and this happens very often, if it's the guy up the street who's having trouble making his car payment, and he's talking about getting into the hustle, and he's talking about discipline and willpower, a lot of times I think that's frustrated people projecting through either through a superiority complex, their own inward feeling of inadequacy. And I see this a lot. People just they're not the great encouragers, they're not the inspirers, they're the great accusers, and they're out there telling everybody what they're not doing right. What you do is right or wrong to the extent it aligns or does not align with your personal values. So never tell someone who they should be. You know, it's kind of like that story about the fisherman on the beach. We've heard about that. There's a wealthy guy on holiday. He's built an empire, and he sees this guy just hanging out, fishing. Then he goes, hangs out in a hammock, then goes back, fishes for a bit. He walks up and says, "Well, what do you do?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm just hanging out, just, fishing." He says, "Well, do you do this every day?" The guy goes, "Yeah, this is my life." And he goes, "Oh my God." The guy's already starting to judge this guy. This guy is lazy. He's not even living up to his own potential. He says, "Do you realize if you put in more hours and you worked a bit harder, eventually you could hire other people to fish for you? You could buy your own boat. And then if you reinvested, you could buy another boat and a fleet of boats. And then you can have your own empire." And the guy on the beach goes, "Wow. And then what can I do?" "Well, then you can retire. Spend your time like hanging out fishing all day on the beach." It's about values. So understand that. And you've got to see people with unconditional positive regard, or they're going to give you the answers they think that you're looking for, or worse, they're going to give you no answers. They're going to shut down. You're going to put them into fight or flight. They're going to either become very argumentative or they're going to disappear. This is the client who you think you had a great coaching session with, then they're gone. It's like, whoa, 6 more days. They would have been here a week. Wow, I don't understand what happened. And a lot of times it's not what happened with them. It's what happened in the communication dynamic. And think about, again, have you ever known someone who is completely dysfunctional and they can't hold down a job, they're in and out of relationships, and then something life-changing happens, like they're expecting a baby, right? They get pregnant or they get somebody else pregnant. And once that baby comes, something switches on in that person and they become the most responsible, loving, disciplined, dependable person you've ever met. Well, did something change in the prefrontal lobes when they had that kid? No. Now they have something they value, and when you have something you value, you start to see the world. And this is an oversimplification. Please forgive me, but the world starts to occur to you very differently, where things are either supportive of that value or they threaten that value. And when something supports what you value on a synaptic level, on a biochemical level, you literally start to sprout dendritic branches. You form synaptic connections and neural networks that reinforces the behaviors that you engage in, that brings you in proximity with that which supports you. And you start to actually dismantle the neural networks and create a brain chemistry that gets you without thought to reactively avoid that which you perceive to be a threat. So everything about you starts to change when you get really clear, not on what your teacher wanted for you, not what dad wants for you. No matter how much dad loves you or mom loves you, if their values for you, their destiny doesn't match with what you truly want. If you had parents that, you spent 10 hours a day just playing the guitar in the room, and they're like, "Oh, you're so lazy. You'll never amount to anything. You got to do your homework. You got to study." Well, lazy people don't spend 10 hours practicing anything. You weren't lazy. You were a musician. So when you identify what somebody values and you can have them connect their behavior, what they're doing in the gym, with what they value most, well, then all of the attributes we associate with success, discipline, willpower, passion, enthusiasm, they start to occur automatically. And I think a very, have you ever seen Ken Robinson's TED Talk?
No.
Well, he talks about this young girl, and it is a beautiful story. She was growing up in the 1930s in England, and she was having a lot of behavior problems. She couldn't sit still, and she couldn't concentrate for any period of time. And things like ADHD hadn't been invented yet, so there was no label to give her. So what the teachers actually did was give her a astonishingly cruel label. Just said, well, she's mentally disabled. And basically she's not capable of learning anything. So that freaked her mother out greatly, as it would any parent. And she brought this girl to a specialist and told the specialist, no matter how hard we try and we work with her, she can't sit still. She can't pay attention for more than 2 seconds. Her teachers have given up, and basically we might need to put her somewhere. So it was desperate. And so this specialist, and this is interesting for someone teaching medicine in practicing medicine in the 1930s, sat down and spoke to this young girl and just talked to her about school and just talked to her about, life. And after about 20 minutes, he motioned for the mother to come into the room. There was a glass partition. He said, "Can I speak to you alone outside the room, please?" And now, if you hear that as a parent, you're thinking, "Oh my God, it's worse than I thought." And he walks out of the room, and he quite considerately, because he didn't want to leave the girl alone, he turns the radio on, and they shut the door. And the mother's like, "What?" And he's like, "Look through the glass." And this little girl was just rocking back and forth on her hands, trying to sit still, but the music was too much for her. And she just got up and started dancing and twirling around the room. And the mother is looking almost apologetically and so humiliated at this doctor. She's like, "I'm sorry." He's like, "Don't apologize." He said, "Your daughter is not disabled. Your daughter is a dancer." Now that little girl, today, we know her as Dame Gillian Lynne. And Dame Gillian Lynne is one of the most accomplished dancers, teachers, choreographers, famous for such productions as Phantom of the Opera or Cats. And,
Wow.
you talk about, well, you need to focus and be more practical, not as a direct pursuit, but as an unintended and unavoidable side effect of being as good as she is. She is worth millions of dollars. And, she has a success level that most people would dream of. But that's because this hopeless girl was first a dancer. So you gotta see, you gotta look not at your client, but into them and see who they are, not as the body in front of you, but the human being residing within it. Because everyone has that thing we are. We have that thing we're good at. We have that thing that sets us on fire. But a lot of times we're told, no, that's not right. That's not accurate. Do what we do. Obey the rules of the tribe. Be one of us. And most of the people who are beckoning you to be just like them, you look at that tribe, that's one screwed up tribe. You want to look at exactly what they're doing and do the opposite. Get out of that. And if we could pull that out, what do you truly want? I'm not talking about what do you think you want, what's acceptable to want, what's the safe thing to want, but what do you truly want, regardless of how other people appraise that which is most important to you. You get people to clearly identify that and then establish strategies and daily behaviors where they can live immersed in that. That's the key of coaching. So I think one of my favorite quotes is by the essayist, 19th century essayist Charles Baudelaire, when he said, "Get drunk. This is the great imperative. If you do not want to feel time's horrid fatal bruise upon your shoulders, grinding you into the earth, get drunk and stay that way." On what, you ask? On wine, poetry, virtue, doesn't matter. Just get drunk. Now, he wasn't talking about alcohol. I didn't realize that. Don't remember much of what happened that year. But what he was talking about is, what do you find most intoxicating? And if you can get people, if you can get them to feel safe enough with you and embolden them to establish what the behaviors are that allow them to explore and live in full alignment with what is most intoxicating, to drink from that incessantly, you might not change your client's life, but you will give them insights where they can achieve magnanimous things.
Wow. So that was very amazing. I like that. You worded that very nicely. I like the way that was all put together.
Well,
so where right? So I know you just came out with a course that talks about all this. Can you give us some feedback or some about the course? Like, what's the course about? What does it entail? What is it like? Why, as a fitness coach or as a trainer, how is this course going to help me with my business and my training?
Okay. Well, simply put, the late, great Peter Drucker probably is regarded as one of the top business thinkers of the 20th century. And he might even be regarded as one of the top thinkers of the 21st century, which is impressive because he didn't really live through it. That's quite a resume. And what Peter Drucker said is that the purpose of a business, regardless of all the things we say a business is dependent on, is to create and keep a customer. And if you are not able to create and keep a customer, you're not able to grow your business. That's obvious. And what creates and keeps a customer, the name of the game we're in, as I said earlier, is the results game. And it isn't, if you're going to produce a result, that has the presupposition that something in the future is going to be transformed. And the experience that brings about that transformation is one that engages and perpetuates behaviors, not shuts someone down. So the only thing someone buys from us is a transformational experience. And it's impossible for someone to successfully initiate and sustain a life change without a behavior change occurring. If you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten, period. So we are in the behavior change business. I know there's a lot of other skill sets, business skills, anatomical skills, physiological, nutritional science skills, indispensable. All of them are necessary, but not sufficient to bring about the results that people desire. So if you want to create and keep a customer, you got to get really good at helping them initiate the behaviors that bring their future vision into their current reality. And in this course, the first thing I do is I unpack. Before I start teaching, I start creating a vacuum, because the founder of the first $1 trillion corporation, Visa Corporation, it wasn't called Visa, but it became Visa, first company to ever create $1 trillion global revenues. It was founded by a guy named Dayhock. And Dayhock said, innovation, which is one of the most important skill sets in anything in the 21st century, it's not about getting new ideas into your head. It's about getting the old ones out. So we focus on myths and we focus on where we want to be versus where are we actually? What are some stats? What is some hard data about where we're at? And what are some myths that I've seen that have perpetuated that stagnation? Let's remove that. And now let's take a look at what absolutely works. Let's look at the data there. And now, in a way that's very engaging and entertaining, let's bring research and let's bring stories together to create a conceptual framework for coaching. And then let's create some hooks to hang it on. So let's give you very specific practices, almost like step by step, word for word, of what you need to get into. And I'm not saying that we teach people to follow scripts. I don't. Now understand, the most inspiring film you have ever seen, where you cried in cinema and you were embarrassed, you're like, oh, don't turn on the lights, that kind of film, it started with a script. But it didn't end there. The person engaged in that script to where they became it. Stanford Meisner, who's probably one of my favorite and most highly regarded acting coaches in history, said that acting is living truthfully in an imaginary circumstance. So what you're doing is the script, but who you're being comes from a place of authenticity. And eventually you can discard that script completely and just do what you're conditioned to do. But we give you that step by step so you know how to start to engage in the process to bring about those results, because results are a direct result of process, period. We talk about outcomes. Outcomes are irrelevant without processes. So that's pretty much what we do throughout the entire coaching course on the IDEA platform.
Okay. Perfect. And where can people? So I posted it up I posted the link up, so anyone that's interested in the course or finding out more can click on the link. Where can other people get a hold of you if they want to follow you? Where can they get in touch with you?
Well, I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I have a fan page. I just put that up. So that is Bobby Cappuccio at the Robert Cappuccio. It's a good way to find me because there's apparently a lot of Robert Cappuccios. Who knew? And I'm on LinkedIn as well. So,
okay.
Yeah. And my website.
That's right.
RobertCappuccio.com.
Perfect. So before we end the call, any questions from anybody? We're going to open it up for a couple questions. Any questions on the webinar today? Anything for Bobby? See if you want to post anything.
Find a different line of work. That's a bit harsh.
All right. So if not, we're going to go ahead and end this call. Thank you, Bobby, for taking the time out today to get on the webinar with us. And definitely was well worth the hour. We got a lot of takeaways.
Thanks. Love being here.
My pleasure. All right, Bobby.
Cheers.
Take care.